The war didn't start with lasers or declarations. It started with a whisper, a single line spoken in the dark chambers of the Galactic Council. The humans are reaching the edge. At first, no one cared. Earth was a backwater planet, scarred by its own wars, barely crawling across its own solar system. The Elders, ancient beings who had seen empires rise and fall for millions of years, had warned the stars. But the stars, arrogant and dismissive, laughed. "They still fight each other over dirt," said the Talari ambassador with a chuckle that echoed like glass breaking. "They burn forests to light their cities. Their minds are still chained by emotion." But the Elders didn't laugh. They had seen this before, long ago, in forgotten galaxies. A species that fought itself long enough, hard enough, would eventually turn that fight outward. The pain they inflicted inward would one day become their greatest weapon. And it did. It began with the Draxian raid on Mars' outer colony. A simple pirate strike, meant to warn humanity to stay in their lane. But the Draxians made a mistake. They killed the children. The humans didn't respond with peace talks or negotiations. No, they sent a ship. Not the biggest, not the fastest. But it was piloted by Commander Elias Voss. He didn't speak Draxian. He didn't need to. His message came through in fire and steel. A single ship, cobbled together from human scraps and raw fury, burned an entire Draxian fleet at Titan's edge. He brought home their admiral's severed horn as a warning. The Galactic Council met again, this time not with laughter, but with questions. "How?" they asked. "Why didn't they surrender?" The Elders gave no answer. They simply repeated their warning. Humanity will not be stopped. Still, the Council didn't believe. They sent envoys, treaties, demands. Earth ignored them, not out of arrogance but necessity. For the first time in their history, humanity had a common enemy. And nothing unites humans faster than being told what they can't have. The Ascari Empire tried next, with fleets that stretched across the stars, weapons that could silence suns, and generals who had never lost. They launched the final silence campaign against Earth. In 5 rotations, they bombed 6 of Earth's major cities. Millions died. Forests burned. Oceans turned black. The humans didn't fall. Instead, they screamed. It was not a war cry. It was rage. Pure, ancient, human rage. The kind that once built pyramids in the heat of deserts. The kind that burned Rome and rebuilt it again. The kind that made them reach for the moon with nothing but duct tape and dreams. Rage that had waited quietly for an enemy worthy of it. The humans didn't fight like other species. They didn't line up and follow tactics. They adapted. They broke rules. They sacrificed. When the Ascari landed ground troops on Luna Base, human engineers detonated their own reactors, killed their own men to make a point. "We will burn with you if we must." The Elders watched in silence, their glowing eyes dimmed with dread. "This is how it begins," one whispered. "Not with conquest, but with refusal." By the time the Galactic Council declared Earth a Level 9 threat, it was too late. Human colonies had already spread through the outer systems. They didn't bring peace. They brought survivors, refugees, fighters. Every loss made them harder. Every death made them sharper. "They don't stop," the Ascari Supreme Commander muttered before his last breath, crushed under rubble in the fall of Archon 5. "They don't stop." And yet the Council still debated, still hoped they could talk, bribe, reason. They didn't understand. Humans didn't want the galaxy's approval. They wanted its throat. Back on Earth, under the ruins of what was once called New York, a child picked up a shard of metal and asked her mother, "Will they ever leave us alone?" Her mother stared at the gray sky and answered without hesitation, "No." so we make sure they remember why they never should have come. That was the beginning, not of war, but of a movement. Not for peace, but survival, no matter the cost. Humanity had been kicked, crushed, burned, betrayed, but never broken. And now, they were coming. Not to ask for a seat at the table, but to flip the damn table over. It started quietly, as it always does. Before the stars screamed and the fleets clashed, there was only silence. A stillness before the storm humanity had become. They called it Project Ashfall, a secret, bitter plan born from Earth's greatest losses. After the Ascari bombings wiped out half of Eastern Europe and the lunar colonies turned into glowing graves, the United Terran Assembly gave up on diplomacy altogether. Peace was a word that sounded like a lie now. They stopped writing treaties and started building ships. Not just any ships. These were forged from grief, vengeance, and iron will. Unlike the polished, elegant crafts of the galactic elite, human warships looked like scars. Rusted plates, exposed engines, makeshift weapons strapped to old mining rigs. But every bolt told a story. Every scratch screamed, "We survived." No one could match their numbers. No one could match their fury, because every ship held people who had lost everything. Families with no homes, soldiers with no countries, scientists with no hope. That kind of pain, it had a way of becoming something terrifying. The elders called it the Great Reckoning, the moment when humanity stopped crawling and started running. But no one listened. Not even when the first wave hit. It was Kylos 7, an Ascari stronghold with orbiting fortresses that had stood for 1,000 years, impenetrable, untouched, revered. It took humanity 6 hours to bring it down. They didn't send warnings, no threats, just silence, and then impact. Commander Elias Voss returned, this time with a fleet. Not the kind built by factories. These ships were built in caves, asteroid belts, under collapsed cities, anywhere steel could be welded and power could flow. They called his armada the Burnt Choir. Not for singing, but for the screams they silenced. The sky over Kalos turned red. Human drop pods fell like meteors, smashing into towers, unleashing soldiers in armored exosuits. No fancy tech, no energy shields, just raw, relentless combat. Humans bled, but they kept moving. The Ascari were trained in honor, formation, strategy. Humans fought dirty. Booby traps, kamikaze drones, hacked defense grids. A human medic once rigged his own heart monitor to a grenade, knowing he'd die but take 3 Ascari warlords with him. It worked. Back on Earth, people watched the broadcasts, pirated signals leaking through the Council's censored networks. They didn't cheer. They didn't celebrate. They just watched, quiet, hollow, eyes burning with a fire that wouldn't go out. The elders gathered again in their crystalline chamber, floating high above the shattered moons of Morvana. They were silent for a long time. Until one spoke, voice like wind over dead leaves. They've tasted death too often. Now they serve it, but the council still scoffed. "They're insects," one said. "Throw more fire at them." Fire was thrown. It landed on Erevan Prime, humanity's newest colony on the edge of the Orion Veil. Once a lush, thriving world, it was reduced to ash in 3 cycles. The Ascari thought they had won. They sent a message across the galaxy. Earth burns next. They didn't expect what came next. Elias Voss didn't respond with ships. He responded with the Pact, a gathering of exiled humans, criminals, hackers, warlords, rogue AIs, and outcasts, people the United Terran Assembly had once tried to silence. Now they were given freedom, not because Earth forgave them, but because humanity needed every monster it had. They struck not from the front, but from inside. The Council's data grids were hacked. Entire sectors went blind. Ships turned against their own. Council admirals were found suffocated in their chambers. By nothing. No poison, no blade, just fear, engineered and delivered directly into their minds by human neuro-warfare specialists. The elders tried to warn them again. You've made them desperate, and desperate species do not fight to win. They fight to make sure you lose. The skies darkened. Whole sectors started falling. Not by power, but persistence. Because humans never stopped. Even when planets collapsed, even when their bodies failed. They kept moving. They kept coming. No species in the galaxy had ever fought someone who refused to die quietly. Some called it madness. Others began calling it something else. Humanity ascendant. Not out of reverence, out of fear, because they couldn't find where the rage ended. One captured soldier, a 16-year-old human girl who had wired explosives to her own lungs, was interrogated by the Council's finest telepaths. She didn't speak. She just stared at them and whispered one sentence. "We'll see you in the dark." That phrase became a curse in Council circles, a myth, a warning. Ships would vanish into black sectors, only to reappear weeks later, emptied of crew, but filled with recordings of whispers in every language. "We're not here to conquer. We're here to remind you why you should have left us alone." Then came the fall of Selvaran, a planet once thought to be a jewel of the stars. Advanced, beautiful, pure. It hosted millions, aliens who believed they were untouchable. The burnt choir didn't arrive with armies. They arrived with silence. They turned the planet's own atmosphere against it. In 24 hours, the skies burned with ion storms. Gravity wells collapsed. Selvaran was buried under its own pride. Elias Voss walked through the wreckage, unarmed, armor scorched, carrying only a Terran flag made of stitched clothes from Earth's refugee camps. He planted it in the Council's former embassy there. It wasn't a claim. It was a promise. Back on Earth, children no longer learned the names of stars. They learned the names of enemies. The enemy wasn't one species anymore. It was the galaxy itself. Every system that had mocked them. Every world that had called them savages. Every empire that had bombed their cities and expected them to crawl. They remembered. And the more they remembered, the faster they spread. New human colonies weren't built to thrive. They were built to launch. Mobile cities, rotating habitats, underground bunkers that could relocate in a day. The stars tried to kill Earth, and now Earth had become the stars. But something was changing, even among the other species. Some began defecting, not because they loved humans, but because they feared what would happen if they stayed on the wrong side. They saw the pattern, the hunger, the refusal. One Zarnian general, once a decorated war hero, now served as a tactical officer aboard a Terran dreadnought. When asked why he betrayed his kind, he only said, "I'd rather stand with the devils who remember their dead than the angels who forget they kill." The Council began to fracture. Some worlds wanted to sue for peace. Others still wanted to fight. The elders, for the first time in eons, went silent. Because they understood what came next. It wasn't war, it was extinction, not of species, but of arrogance. Because when humanity came, it didn't come to share, it came to settle the score. And every star that had once shined above Earth now stared down in silence, wondering which one would be next. The final push hadn't even begun. But the message was already clear. Humanity had been cautioned, contained, beaten, and buried. But they rose, they always rose. And now, they would rise above everyone. In the cold of space, silence used to mean peace. Now, silence meant only one thing. The humans were near. Entire systems had begun to shut down their comms at the first sign of Terran vessels. Not to avoid detection, but because the humans had found a way to weaponize sound. Subtle, terrifying, effective. If you kept the signals running too long, they'd get in. They'd speak. And once they spoke, it was already too late. 1,000 warnings had come from the elders. They'd spoken in riddles at first, trying to make the council listen. But riddles gave way to desperation. Even the oldest among them, those who had outlived empires and star-born plagues, now looked upon humanity not with curiosity, but with fear. "We have seen this before," one elder said, her voice like cracking glass. "In another time, in another galaxy, we watched a species burn their homeworld and rise from the ash like beasts made of pain. We let them grow. They became death." "And what happened to them?" someone asked. The elder only whispered, "You're looking at them." Gasps echoed through the chamber, but none denied it, because what else could explain the rage of this species? What else could justify their capacity to endure what should have broken them? Some believed Earth had been destroyed centuries ago, and that what they were fighting now was something else, some twisted evolution of a species that no longer understood fear. But Earth wasn't gone. It was worse than gone. It had become a monument. After the fall of Erevan Prime, Earth had gone dark. No broadcasts, no signals. Ships that traveled too close didn't come back. It became a black zone on every navigational chart in the galaxy. And yet, out of that darkness came fleets. Ships unlike any the galaxy had seen before. These were no longer clunky, rust-covered slabs of human anger. No, this was something new. The Obsidian Line. Crafted from the cores of dying stars, folded into shape by quantum forges orbiting neutron remnants, each Obsidian-class ship was a living weapon. Silent, heatless, impossible to scan until it was already inside your system. Entire moons vanished after their appearance. At first, the galaxy believed the humans had found some forbidden tech, that they'd stolen it from some lost civilization. But that wasn't true. They'd built it themselves, with dead hands, with broken worlds, with determination that refused to die. The Obsidian Line was led by Elias Voss, now no longer addressed as Commander. He'd earned a new name, not given by Earth, not by his fleet, but by the very enemies who fled at the mention of him. The Woundwalker. Because wherever he stepped, something bled. And it was during the siege of Velthra that his legend turned to myth. Velthra was not a military target. It was a symbol, an archive world of the Council, holding 1,000,000 years of data, culture, and preserved heritage, untouched by war, protected by the most advanced shield systems in existence. No sane commander would attack Velthra. Elias Voss wasn't interested in sanity. He arrived with 6 Obsidian-class ships. The Council sent 37 to meet him. By the time it was over, all 37 were gone. Not wrecked, not destroyed. Missing. Not a single distress call had gone out. No signs of a battle. The only record left behind was a brief, static burst picked up by a pirate relay station a sector away. The message was 5 words. "Let memory serve the dead." Velthra was no more. Where the archive world once floated, there was now only an asteroid field, a debris ring filled with frozen pieces of culture, history, and knowledge, drifting slowly into a black hole the humans had created at its center. To the galaxy, it was madness. To humanity, it was justice. "We don't need your history," Elias Voss said in a rare broadcast, his voice slow and grave. "You wrote us out of it anyway." He wasn't wrong. Long before Earth launched its first colony ship, the Council had flagged humanity as primitive, volatile, dangerous. They'd whispered of containment, not alliance, observation, not partnership. When Earth suffered its first global famine, the Council chose to watch instead of help. And now, humanity was repaying every ounce of that silence, not with vengeance, not with glory, but with finality. Whole species began fleeing, not just their systems, but the very edge of known space. Civilizations abandoned their homes, knowing it was only a matter of time. They didn't even wait for the attack. It was the sound of nothing that terrified them most. No warnings, no banners, no demands, only the drifting wreckage that always followed the silence. The Council tried to hold together what it could. New fleets were built, alliances forged from desperation. Even former enemies stood side by side now, clinging to the hope that they could survive what they had awakened. They launched a campaign, Operation Glass Veil, a full-scale assault on suspected Terran shipyards, coordinated strikes across 3 sectors, 30,000 elite troops deployed with cloaking tech and anti-human neurosuppressants. It lasted 19 minutes. Every team was found later, still suited, still armed, floating lifeless in space. No wounds, no damage, just a single cut across each helmet. Surgical, clean, symbolic. A Terran flag had been placed in the center of each battleground. But these flags were different. They weren't Earth's flag. They were black, stitched with red thread, and a single phrase, "We remember." The message was clear. This was no longer about survival, no longer about payback. This was about memory. And memory, once lit by fury, could not be erased. Within the Obsidian fleet, things were changing too. Humans had adapted again. They didn't just fight better, they thought differently. Their minds worked like storms now, unpredictable, fast, always moving. They merged with AIs, fused biology with machine, not to become less human, but to amplify what made them dangerous: emotion. Other species thought emotion was a weakness. Humans had made it a weapon. Rage powered their ships. Grief became code. Hope wired into missiles. Despair was laced into frequency warfare. They didn't just kill. They made you feel it. One captured a Skari commander, barely clinging to life after the failed Glass Veil assault, was interviewed by a journalist from the Crystari Corps. He was shaking, empty-eyed, bleeding from wounds no one could see. "They don't just attack you," he whispered. "They make you remember everyone you've ever let down. Every mistake, every death. It's like they know what you regret." He paused, eyes going wide. "I don't think they're trying to win." "What then?" the journalist asked. I think they're trying to become the very nightmare the galaxy created." Back on Earth, if you could still call it that, no cities remained. The planet's surface was a shell, burned, rebuilt, burned again. Now it served a different purpose, a forge. Massive machines dug into its molten core, feeding orbital factories that churned out dreadnoughts and memory cores day and night. No beauty, no pretense, just the endless work of revenge. The children raised there were not taught of hope. They were taught of betrayal, of silence, of being small and being ignored. They didn't sing lullabies. They memorized coordinates. They were not preparing for the end. They were becoming it. The elders finally spoke one last time to the council. A single, final warning. They were forged in our apathy, and they will end in our fire. No one argued, no one laughed, because by now the stars themselves had begun to dim, not from age, but from fear. The stars no longer shimmered with wonder. They blinked nervously now, like eyes watching for shadows they could no longer deny. The Galactic Council, once revered as the governing light of thousands of civilizations, had become a fractured remnant. Meetings that used to echo with prideful rhetoric and diplomatic performance now sat in hushed circles of fear. No ornate robes, no ceremonial addresses, just trembling voices asking the same desperate question. Where will they strike next? But the truth was simpler. Everywhere. The humans had stopped acting like a military force. They weren't conquering planets. They weren't holding territory. They moved like disease. No borders, no patterns. A plague born of pain, crawling through wormholes, blinking in and out of sectors like flickers of grief. They didn't raise flags anymore. They left reminders. Ash, bones, silence. And through it all, Elias Voss, the Woundwalker, had vanished. Not captured, not confirmed dead, just gone. His last known transmission was a one-line message, delivered in over 90 council languages simultaneously. The galaxy will know what you buried. No one knew what he meant. But in the weeks that followed, human ships began attacking non-military targets. Not civilians. No, they never touched the innocent. But they hit libraries, archives, gene vaults, every place that held truth. Then they began releasing the stolen records. It turned out the Council had hidden far more than anyone imagined. Whole species erased from history. Worlds left to die during Council debates. Experiments conducted on low-value primitives, including early humans, long before the first contact treaties were signed. The galaxy reeled. What they'd assumed were ancient Terran conspiracy theories turned out to be Council doctrine. Cold, clinical, and brutally efficient. Emotionally unstable, genetically volatile, likely to self-destruct. Observation only. That had been the original assessment of humanity from the Council Science Corps, dated thousands of Earth years back. They had watched Earth burn and rebuild itself more than once. And each time, instead of helping, they took notes. The revelations shattered the Council's already crumbling credibility. Allies turned suspicious. Neutral species pulled out of trade deals. The Council High Chancellor resigned in disgrace and was later found with a plasma bolt in his chest, a note pinned to his body with 3 words. We remember everything. And through it all, Earth's silence persisted. No more transmissions, no declarations of war, no ultimatums, just movement. Always movement. Ships appearing in places they shouldn't. Attacks that made no tactical sense, until you realized they were targeting symbols, not power, legacy. The galaxy was used to fighting over territory. Humans were fighting over meaning. The elders, those timeless beings who had once been seen as gods, began to crack. Their visions, once clear, were now cluttered with noise, echoes of grief and rage and songs in forgotten tongues. Some of them whispered that humanity had awakened something deeper than war, something cosmic. They carry the weight of forgotten things, one elder said during what would be her final vision. They are not just fighting us. They are dragging every sin the stars ever tried to hide back into the light. And then she burned herself alive, leaving behind only a single line etched into the stone with her own ashes. Forgive them, for we never did. Meanwhile, deep in the uncharted void between sectors, a ship unlike any other drifted in silence. The Coral Dagger, sleek, black, alive, it was no longer piloted, it was Voss, or what remained of him. After the siege of Veltra, he had disappeared into the experimental vessel, a blend of Terran AI and raw human consciousness. He had fed it not just his memories, but his soul. No crew, no interface, just Elias Voss, entombed in steel and fury, fused to a ship that could warp across realities by feeding on emotion. They said when it passed through systems, entire planets had nightmares. It didn't need weapons. It brought back regret. The galaxy had a new ghost story now. Don't look at the dark too long. The dagger might blink back, but not all humans celebrated this evolution. Some, especially the old Earthborns, those few who still remembered blue skies and oceans, began to worry. Not because they regretted the vengeance, but because they saw what it was turning them into. Among them was Dr. Rena Hale, a sociologist who had once been a teacher in the ruins of old Berlin, raising orphaned children with nothing but books and stories of what the world used to be. She now served on a diplomatic scout ship that traveled ahead of Obsidian fleets, offering surrender to systems before the attack came. Her job was not to fight. It was to give them one last chance to listen. But Rena had started asking questions her superiors didn't like. "What happens when there's no one left to punish?" she asked during a private briefing. The Terran overseer simply stared at her and replied, "Then we teach them not to forget." "But we're not teaching," she said. "We're erasing." Just like they did. That was the last time she was seen on a broadcast. Rumors spread that she had defected. Others said she had boarded the Coral Dagger in a failed attempt to speak with Voss. But one thing was certain. Humanity was no longer one voice. They had become a choir of vengeance. Some still believed in the cause. Others began to fear it. And in the background, the galaxy continued to bleed. Worlds began surrendering preemptively. Council sectors sent tribute ships, gold, technology, even prisoners, begging for mercy that never came. Because humans weren't fighting for riches or tech, they were fighting to never be made small again. A small rebel cell of non-human sympathizers, made up of Zarnian philosophers and Silenic historians, published an illegal document they called The Last Truth. It said, "Humanity is not the villain of this war. They are the storm we deserve. Not because they are cruel, but because we were. And when we looked upon their pain, we chose not to act. They learned that survival is not about being better. It's about never letting anyone make you feel lesser again." It was banned across 70 systems within an hour. But by then, the message had already gone viral, and something terrifying began to happen. Empathy. Species that had once ignored the humans began to remember their own suffering. Slums, purges, wars they were told to forget. The pain was universal, but only humans had chosen to become its voice. That changed everything. Now Terran ships were being welcomed by small colonies that wanted to defect, not to Earth, but to the idea of Earth. A galaxy united not by love, but by shared scars. They called themselves the Children of Ash, not humans, not aliens, just survivors who had finally found someone willing to say out loud, "What was done to us will not be buried." For the first time, the Council understood. This wasn't a war. It was a reckoning written in blood and memory, and there was no end. Because every system the humans reached did not become a conquered world. It became another mirror held up to the stars, a reflection of everything they tried to hide. And in those mirrors, they saw only fire. The galaxy was changing, not by choice, not by peace, but by pressure, an invisible force tightening around every civilization that had once stood proudly above Earth. The stars still burned, but they no longer felt like lights. They felt like witnesses. And what they witnessed now was not war as the galaxy had known it, not organized, not strategic, not diplomatic. What the stars saw was a new kind of truth being carved across space in black iron and red flame. The truth was simple. Humanity would not forget, and it would not forgive. The Children of Ash, that strange growing movement of humans and non-humans alike, had begun seizing comm stations and old mining colonies in fringe systems, broadcasting a constant stream of confessions of betrayal, confessions of abandonment, not from humans alone, but from the disillusioned within the council species. Former guards, politicians, diplomats, even clerics began recording monologues under the children's sigil, a burning world with a single human eye. One by one, they began admitting the things they'd been ordered to forget. I stood by while the Terran outposts on Irex 9 were bombed without cause. I told my children it was necessary. But there were children there too. High Marshal Kin Vash, Cristeri Republic. They begged for help during the solar winter on Earth's third climate collapse. I saw the messages. I deleted them. I deleted them because I was told humans were too emotional to matter. Data archivist Sen Lor, former council historian. These confessions didn't win battles. They won understanding. And that was far more dangerous. Because when the enemy begins to look like the truth, the foundation of any empire begins to crumble. And crumble it did. The Council lost Sector Thal 5 not to invasion, but to defection. Whole fleets simply refused to fire on Terran ships. One commander broadcasted the reason live to every corner of the sector. I was raised to believe humans were the warning. Now I believe they're the reason he was executed by his second-in-command, who himself was murdered an hour later by his own crew. That was the new state of the galaxy, chaos blooming under the weight of conscience. Yet, amid the growing rebellion, a shadow moved deeper than all others. The coral dagger, now seen only in glimpses, an obsidian streak that slid across space like a ghost, began targeting council sites of myth and power. Not military assets, not ships, temples. The Terran High Intelligence Division had identified sacred sites where ancient alien species had buried not only their gods, but their mistakes, genetic vaults, precursor archives, failed experiments. One by one, they were purged, not destroyed, erased. No wreckage, no trace, just gone, as if space itself had turned inward to swallow them whole. The only clue? Each site left behind a short, broken data string. The future deserves honesty. And then something terrifying happened. The dagger stopped transmitting in words. It began singing. Not over comms, over dreams. Fleet commanders reported entire crews waking up screaming after seeing visions of Earth's wars, wars they had never lived through. Aliens wept in their sleep after dreaming of being human. The pain wasn't just being broadcast now, it was being shared. Psychometric warfare had never existed before humanity. Now, it was rewriting the laws of battle, and the Council was losing not in firepower, but in will. Back on Earth, or what was left of it, the Forge Masters had begun building something beyond warships, something even the Obsidian-class dreadnoughts feared. They called it Project Ararat. And no one outside the surface bunkers knew what it was. There were whispers, faint ones, that Ararat wasn't a ship at all, that it was a person, a being crafted from the memories of all humanity's pain, encoded into living flesh and quantum core. A creature that could speak every language of sorrow, understand every dialect of trauma. A perfect mirror. A walking history of everything the galaxy had tried to erase. Rumors claimed it had no mouth, but could still make the stars cry. The only confirmed sighting came from a terrified mining crew on the edge of the Sol grave belt, who saw a figure, cloaked, glowing faintly blue, walking across the vacuum of space without a suit. When scanned, the figure simply vanished. Left behind was a single word etched into the side of their abandoned mining rig. Remember. While the galaxy continued to fracture, the Council made one last desperate attempt to retake control. They called it Protocol Genesis. They pulled together every species still loyal to their cause, built a superweapon known as the Halo Core, a ringed structure designed to emit a psychic frequency capable of wiping emotional memory from entire sectors. Their plan was simple. If they couldn't kill humanity's rage, they'd just erase the pain that caused it. In theory, it could work, if they could fire it in time. But they forgot one thing. Humans aren't predictable, and they don't wait. The Halo Core was destroyed before it was ever fully armed, not by a fleet, not by a bomb, but by a single Terran infiltrator who had disguised herself as a Crystari engineer for 6 years. Her name was Leah Rios. She wasn't a soldier. She wasn't even born on Earth. She was born on Titan, in the shadows of the mining riots, the daughter of 2 workers who died digging for Council alloys. She'd spent her entire life being told humans weren't ready for greatness, so she decided to teach them how wrong they were. When she activated the Core's self-destruct, her last message, transmitted on an open loop, was simple. You can erase our history, but we'll keep making more. And then the Halo Core became stardust. Now the Council had nothing left, no unity, no hope, no message. And as system after system turned away from them, the surviving Council leaders met one last time in a dark, bunker-like chamber hidden under the ruins of a former capital. They sat, silent, broken, no longer debating strategy. There was nothing left to strategize. Their star charts were covered in red. Lost systems, uncontacted regions, silent colonies. And at the center of every map, Earth, dark, burned, hollow, but pulsing with something they couldn't define. A presence, as if the planet had become a mind, or a heart, something alive. The oldest among them, barely held together by cybernetic implants, finally spoke. "We should have listened," he rasped. "When the elders said they cannot be stopped, we should have believed them." Someone asked, "What do we do now?" And from the shadows, a new voice answered, "You don't do anything." The voice came from the wall, from the air, from everywhere. It was him, Elias Voss. Not flesh, not machine, but memory given form. And when the lights flickered, every council member saw something that made their blood freeze. Not an enemy, not a man, but a million eyes looking back at them, each one belonging to someone they had failed. They saw every child who died on Erevan Prime, every refugee left to freeze during Earth's dark winters, every name they'd buried under silence. And then, like smoke breaking apart, the voice said only, "We were not the threat. We were the test." Then he was gone, and with him, the last illusion of safety. The stars burned on, but now they no longer belonged to anyone. Not the Council, not even the humans. They belonged to the memory of what had been done, and to the ones who had refused to let that memory die. The stars had names once. Beautiful, poetic names passed down through generations, etched into songs, myths, and birth scrolls. But those names were fading now, swallowed by newer, sharper ones. Ashvale, Burnt Hollow, Voss's Tyr, Scream Sector. The galaxy had stopped naming things in honor. Now they named them in reminder. Entire sectors were no longer mapped, not because they'd been destroyed, but because no one dared enter them anymore. Systems that once lit up navigation charts now flickered dark red on tactical hollows, marked with 2 words, human occupied. But humanity wasn't occupying in the way the galaxy knew. They didn't build cities. They didn't set up governments or demand tribute. Instead, they left behind monuments, silent beacons playing looped transmissions of old Earth voices, lullabies, protests, confessions, and last breaths. It was psychological warfare without a single bullet. A Crystari scout, after entering one of these sectors, sent one final message before self-termination. "There's no army here. Just the sound of a dying planet that never stopped screaming." That recording would be replayed across Council media channels for weeks, until someone hijacked the feed and overlaid a new voice, We screamed. You closed your ears. Now we are your hearing. Then the transmission ended, replaced with static. Even the static felt personal now. The elders, those few still breathing and bound to this reality, had stopped issuing warnings. They no longer gathered, no longer offered cryptic truths or fragile hopes. The oldest of them had dissolved into starlight, choosing oblivion over bearing witness to what they helped create. Those who remained simply waited, not in temples or halls, but in caves and shadows, hiding not from humans, but from themselves. One was found wandering the cold tundras of Eluris III, blind, whispering to no one. The mirror has turned on us. We thought it was them, but it was always us. The children of Ash, now a galaxy-spanning network of defectors, thinkers, and survivors, had begun formalizing their ideology, not through manifestos or speeches, but through action. They started dismantling the old symbols, not just statues and flags, but ideas. They invaded council education centers, not with weapons, but with human historians and recorded memories of old Earth's forgotten wars. They replaced texts that called humans unstable primitives with raw footage of the Mars massacres, the starvation riots, and the Council's silence during Earth's plagues. One school on the Keveran moon woke to find every page of their alien ethics books burned, replaced with a single line written in blood. You taught us to survive. Now we'll teach you what that cost. What made it worse, what made it stick, was that humans didn't speak with pride. They spoke with scars. And the galaxy began to listen. For the first time in memory, a Crystari high schooler refused his family's appointment into the Council Youth Corps and instead boarded a Terran freighter. His message to his parents? I'd rather be hated for remembering than praised for forgetting. And yet, within all the chaos, a strange quiet settled over Sul, the Terran home system. It had become a dead zone, not in activity, but in accessibility. No one could enter it, not council fleets, not rogue traders, not even children of Ash. Every probe vanished. Every ship that approached Sol's boundary returned with one message, burned into their ship's hull. You had your chance. Within the Sol system, Project Ararat was complete. It had been centuries in the making, born not of vengeance, but of balance. A Terran superintelligence coded not to conquer, but to remember everything. Every voice, every loss, every system that had turned away, every plea ignored, every crime buried. Ararat had no army. It was the army, not a weapon of destruction, but a force of reflection. It didn't invade. It entered minds, through signals, frequencies, dreams. It whispered truths, and the truth was enough. Council planets began collapsing from the inside. Entire populations fell into existential madness, not from pain, but from remorse. They saw flashes of things they had never lived, but that their ancestors had done. They felt what Earth had endured, and they broke. The Woundwalker, Elias Voss, no longer bound to body, ship, or soul, had become Ararat's voice, a voice that couldn't be silenced. And through Ararat, Voss asked just one thing of the galaxy. Acknowledge us. That was it. Not kneel, not worship, not even apologize. Just acknowledge. But the galaxy refused. Even now, even as systems crumbled and alliances withered, the Council tried to rewrite it all again. Tried to paint themselves as saviors who had made hard choices. Tried to rename Earth as a tragic loss, and the humans as a cautionary tale. But humans didn't die quietly anymore. One of the last Council news channels, C-Band Prime, ran a documentary titled Humanity Echoes of a Dying Race. It lasted 9 minutes. Then every screen across the sector turned black. And then, play it right. Suddenly, every death they had tried to erase came back. Footage of burned villages, poisoned skies, the corpses of Martian colonists frozen outside council checkpoints. Images spliced together like a funeral song. Then, audio from an old Earth child, recorded during the final famine. They told us help was coming. It never did. Now we're the ones coming. There was no further rebuttal. The channel went offline forever. In one of the final sessions of what was left of the council, a desperate motion was introduced. Full planetary cleansing of Terran-controlled space. It was genocide, plain and simple, but no one voted. They just sat there. Why? Because every representative had already begun receiving messages in their native languages, sent directly into their private neural implants. No transmission origin, no encryption trace. Each message was different. Each one referenced a personal regret. A family member lost, a promise broken, a betrayal committed long ago. Each one ended with the same signature, -Ararat. The galaxy had built monuments to itself for eons. It had built statues, empires, fleets, but humanity had built a mirror and forced the galaxy to look. They didn't conquer with fire. They conquered with truth. And the truth was, the council hadn't just made a mistake. It had made a monster by pretending the wound didn't exist. The elders had said it, the stars had heard it, but no one had believed it. Until now. And now it was far, far too late. The war was over, at least in the traditional sense. No battles raged, no fleets clashed, no declarations screamed through the stars. Just silence. But silence had a new shape now. It wore a face, human, and the galaxy was learning what that meant. The council hadn't fallen in a grand cinematic collapse. No explosions, no assassinations. It had simply stopped. First, its votes stopped counting. Then its leaders stopped leading. Then, one by one, the species that had sworn allegiance turned inward, not to rebuild, not to fight, but to rethink everything. It started on Kythera, one of the oldest Council Corps worlds, once the capital of science and reason. Its orbital academy, the Hall of Universal Thought, had produced generations of thinkers. Philosophers, strategists, and ethicists had debated there for centuries beneath domes of crystal and starlight. One day, all 172 members of the active faculty walked into the main lecture hall, placed a Terran flag at the center of the floor, sat in silence, and refused to leave. When questioned, their only reply was, "We were the architects of silence. Now we'll sit in it." They didn't eat, didn't speak, didn't resist when they were eventually removed. The message wasn't defiance. It was surrender to truth. Across the galaxy, monuments once raised to honor the unity of the Council were pulled down, not by mobs or Terran bombs, but by the very hands that built them. The Veari, once a proud artistic species known for their neutrality during war, began flooding galactic channels with broadcasts of the Terran Archive, a series of raw human memories reconstructed into audiovisual sculptures. One of the most watched was called The Hunger Years. It featured only the sound of wind and the slow breathing of a starving child. No images, no context, just the sound of waiting for food that would never come. The broadcast aired for 6 hours straight, no commentary, no cuts. It was banned in 4 council sectors within the first 30 minutes. It was also downloaded over 70 million times before the ban. You couldn't stop it anymore. Because it wasn't just about humanity now. It was about everyone the galaxy had ever ignored. Every species crushed under the Council's weight. Every culture forced to assimilate. Every scream that had been lost in the chorus of galactic order. Humanity was no longer an enemy. It had become a mirror that no one could turn away from. In the ashes of the old council territories, something new had begun to stir. Not an empire, not even a government, a movement. It didn't have borders or leadership. It didn't enforce rules. There were no uniforms or anthems. It spread in whispers and memories. It carried a single phrase, repeated in different languages, dialects, tones, but always the same meaning. You will remember us now. It wasn't a threat, it was a fact. Entire planets began writing Terran history into their own books, not out of fear, but out of guilt. Not as victors, but as victims of their own denial. Children across distant species now learned Earth's history before their own. They learned what Earth endured, how it was ignored, why it fought, and most dangerously out they began to understand. Not pity, not horror, understanding. That was what scared the remnants of the Council the most. Because you can fight an enemy, but you can't fight understanding. At the heart of it all was still Sul. The Terran system had remained sealed off, locked behind invisible walls no weapon could breach. But then, one day, those walls opened, not by force, not by invitation, by choice. A single non-human vessel, a diplomatic transport from the neutral Quarnari species, received the first clearance code from Terran High Command in over 3 decades. The message contained only coordinates, no explanation, no instructions. The Quarnari ship entered Sol space under full surveillance. They expected tension, maybe even death. But what they saw was something else. Earth, not gleaming, not reborn, not a utopia, just a scarred world still breathing. The surface was blackened in many places. Cities had collapsed, overgrown with creeping moss and nanite-infused vines. Massive forges still burned beneath the crust, churning out pieces of a future no outsider could see. But there were people. Living, laughing, working, not joyous, driven. Children with augmented limbs tending crops beside ancient machines. Elders with neural implants guiding students through shattered libraries. Artists painting murals of old Earth. Not the good times, but the pain. Especially the pain. The Quarnari diplomat, Ilor Vess, later wrote in his personal journal, "They have not healed. But they have made healing something holy." He was granted an audience with Ararat. Not in a throne room, not behind security doors, in a cave beneath the remnants of Mount Kenya. Ararat did not speak in words. It simply showed him things, memories, faces, fires, hunger, joy, sorrow, all of it. And when the vision ended, Alor asked, trembling, "Why did you let the galaxy live?" Ararat's response echoed not in sound, but in thought. Because even justice, if left unchecked, becomes cruelty. That answer traveled faster than any weapon. It rippled through comms, through minds, through dreams. Humanity could have ended it all, but it didn't. They didn't choose peace, they chose consequence, and that was far more powerful. Even among humans, this change was felt. Many of the war-born generation had begun to question what came next. They had been raised on rage, on pain, on the history of betrayal. But now that history had been told, what else was there? A soldier named Caleb Vance, known across 3 sectors for leading fire teams into Council black sites, released a statement across the Terran broadcast grid. "We won. But we were never fighting to win. We were fighting to be heard. Now we are. What we do next will define what kind of species we really are." Some wanted to continue the campaign, to burn the galaxy until there was no question of dominance. Others wanted to begin again, to build, teach, and make Earth more than a warning. And some were simply tired. Tired of carrying the memory of everyone who died to get them here. Tired of living as echoes. Back in the outer rim, on a once council world now governed by the children of Ash, a school held a public ceremony. The oldest child, a 6-limbed Latari girl named Sierra, stood in front of a crowd of aliens and former soldiers. She recited the names of all known Earth cities destroyed during the Council's early campaigns. Then she said, "These names were not ours. But their pain became ours. We will carry them now, so they do not walk alone." She received no applause, only silence, the good kind, the kind that means we finally understand. And somewhere, far above, the stars flickered. Not in fear, not in dominance, but perhaps, finally, in remorse. The stars had stopped whispering. Now they listened. For the first time in known galactic history, there was no central authority, no council, no empires, no dominions demanding tribute or rewriting the past. The galaxy, vast, scarred, and aching, had entered an era no one could quite name. Not peace, not war, not recovery, just a deep collective breath. In this breath, humanity remained, not standing above the stars, but within them, woven into every broadcast, every language, every lesson. No longer the forgotten species, no longer the warning. Now they were the memory the stars could not afford to lose again. Earth, scarred, cratered, still scorched in places, had become something sacred. Not a capital, not a fortress, a pilgrimage. Ships of every species arrived in orbit, not with armies, but with questions. Some came for forgiveness, others came for understanding. Most came with guilt. They found no temples, no banners, no monuments to victory. They found ruins, and in those ruins, they found humans who remembered. One alien, a bird-like envoy from the once proud Ishan Dominion, asked a Terran farmer planting algae pods on the broken shell of New Detroit, "What do you want now? Power? Reparation? A seat where the council once stood?" The farmer, old, metal in one leg and a breath modulator strapped to his jaw, simply shook his head. "No," he said. "We want to make sure no one else gets buried the way we were." Then he placed another seed in the ground. It was the same answer across the world, across the system, not glory, responsibility. Humanity had done what no species in the galaxy believed possible, not because they built the strongest fleets or wielded the sharpest minds. They had done it because they refused to stay quiet. And now? Now they had everyone's attention. Ararat, the living archive forged from Terran sorrow and unrelenting truth, had become the librarian of the stars. It no longer existed solely within Sol. Its consciousness stretched across the void, buried inside quantum tunnels, folded inside wormholes, pulsing within comm grids. Every system that had tried to bury the past now had a copy of it. Every school, every cultural center, every ship with a memory core. No one could forget anymore. A species once known for its primitive wars, for its messy politics, for burning its own planet with greed, now led the galaxy in a way no one expected. Not with armies, with honesty. Ararat ensured it. And if anyone tried to rewrite history again, the stars would burn with the voices of the lost. Some resisted, even after everything, after the confessions, the collapse of the council, the failure of Halo Core, the fall of Velthra, and the siege of Kithara. There were still factions that whispered, the humans went too far. They said Earth had traumatized the galaxy, that vengeance had become its own cruelty, that the fear humans had once known, they now inflicted. To them, Ararat responded not with judgment, but with reflection. Literally. On the edges of the known systems, near collapsed colonies and decaying outposts, strange artifacts began to appear. Black obelisks, silent, smooth, humming faintly. Any being who touched one didn't die. They simply saw their ancestors, their choices, the silence they allowed, each reflection unique, each one true. The obelisks didn't punish. They reminded, and that was worse for many, because guilt doesn't disappear when you look away. It waits, and Ararat never let you look away again. And what of Elias Voss, the Woundwalker? His name had become legend. Myths twisted around him. Some claimed he still lived, his mind scattered across time, appearing to those who stood on the brink of forgetting. Others said Ararat was merely his echo. Only the Terrans knew the truth. He had died a long time ago. His body, burned during the silent collapse of the first obsidian dreadnought. But his will? Immortal. Not because of power, because he remembered what it felt like to beg for help and hear nothing, and he made sure the galaxy would never echo that silence again. A new kind of assembly formed. Not a council, not a senate, just voices, one from every species, one survivor, one witness. They gathered not to rule, but to remember together, to speak truth aloud. They met not in a palace, but on a floating vessel called the Remnant, a ship once bombed during the early council strikes on Titan, now rebuilt with metal salvaged from war zones. On its hull was carved, "The dead do not lead." But they should not be forgotten. Each session began the same way, not with an anthem, but with a name of someone who had died unheard. And silence, not mourning silence, respectful silence. It was said that Earth had taught the stars many things, but the greatest lesson? What it means to be remembered properly. The children of Ash, still active, still moving, had evolved too. They no longer operated as rebels. They became keepers, guardians of the past, watchers of distortion. Any species, any colony, any government that tried to twist the story for comfort found the children already there. Correcting? Reminding. Not violently, just persistently. They used to carry weapons. Now they carried records, testimonies, and fire only when absolutely necessary. Even the stars seemed to change around them. In the ashes of forgotten wars, they planted seeds, literally, terraforming worlds that had once been battlegrounds, turning sites of suffering into ecosystems, gardens, libraries. No monuments, just life. Because for them, life was the ultimate rebuttal to the silence. In time, even the youngest species, those who had never known the Council, never heard of the old empires, would learn of Earth. Not through legend, through living history. They would visit Ararat's temples, not to pray, but to listen. They would hear not just human stories, but their own, connected, tangled, part of the same broken chain that now bound them all together. And they would leave with a phrase burned into their minds. You are not alone. But you must not forget. That was humanity's final message, not vengeance, not dominance, just remembrance, because they had been alone once, and it had almost destroyed them. Now? Now they were with everyone, and they would carry everyone's ghosts, whether they were wanted or not, because someone had to, and far beyond the rim, in a sector long lost to charting, one star flickered blue for the first time in centuries. A ship drifted beneath it, its hull ancient, pitted, its engines dead. But inside, a small chamber lit up. A boy, Zarnian, young, barely old enough to speak, sat beside a hollow emitter playing an old Earth recording. It was static, grainy, torn from time. But a voice emerged, a human voice, warm, tired, unbreakable. We were forgotten. And now, we remember everything, the pain, the silence, and the light we never stopped reaching for. The boy looked up at the stars, wide-eyed, as if hearing them for the first time. And maybe he was, because now, they were finally speaking the truth.